Hey, what's up guys, it's Vakosi back with another Genshin Impact video. As you are aware, the Spiral Abyss had its weekly reset and thankfully enough there are no new enemies in it. The introduction of new enemies will happen next time, but for now it's the same old Spiral Abyss. If you are looking for a guide tailored to the current version of the Abyss, then check out one of the previous videos. However, I thought it would be a good idea to delve into the community's reaction when it comes to the Abyss, especially because we all know that it hasn't seen any changes for over 2 years now. This discussion resurfaced once again with the introduction of Pure Fiction in Honkai Star Rail, which essentially is the second type of Spiral Abyss activity in that game. Many people, especially over on Twitter, as usual, aren't necessarily upset about it, but they express a desire for the Genshin devs to pay a bit more attention to the Abyss, and I think that is a fair sentiment. So yeah, let us talk about that. There are a lot of aspects when it comes to the Abyss. Quality of life, the combat, maybe even new activities that fulfill the same role as the Abyss. All of that stuff is definitely noteworthy, but for the purpose of this video, we will keep it compact and talk about two arguments that I see fairly often. Arguments that are being brought up again and again by people over on Twitter, as well as my own take on a potential Floor 13. The arguments that you see being brought up over on Twitter, at least currently, are A. Change the team creation window, as well as B. Allow travelers to change their artifacts and weapons while being inside the Abyss. And unironically, my own opinion when it comes to point B will be quite different from the usual takes. Now, what do people mean when it comes to changing the team creation window? The main reason why this is being brought up as often as it is right now is the current combat event in Genshin. In that event, and I hope there's some footage of it in the background right now, it is very easy to swap around characters. This system, at least as far as I'm aware of, hasn't been in Genshin so far at all. I don't remember a single instance where it was so easy to just swap around characters. And people, understandably so, want to see the system being implemented into the Abyss as well. And honestly, I absolutely agree. This new system is so good that I simply don't see a single argument as to why they shouldn't introduce it into the Abyss, if not even the entire game. But obviously, there is point B. Allowing people to change their artifacts and weapons inside the Abyss is a good thing on first glance, and at least right now, with the current artifacts and enemies, I don't think there would be a negative consequence when it comes to introducing it. But as someone who has been playing World of Warcraft for quite a long time, I know what the option of changing your gear inside a dungeon, and let's be honest here, the Abyss is basically a dungeon, would look like. As an example, are you lacking healing in floor 12 chamber 2? Well, equip a full heal set on your healer, Kokomi for example. And once you're done with chamber 2, you can switch back to your more DPS oriented build. This in itself is not a bad thing, but what happens if MiHoYo decides to introduce 2 artifact sets into the game that will either increase the damage you do when there are 3 or more enemies around you, or increase the damage you do when there are only 2 or less enemies around you? You see where I'm going with that? Basically what will happen is a constant switcheroo between artifacts. And that is basically what has been going on in World of Warcraft for quite some time. It was a big problem for the devs, especially when it comes to scaling NPCs, and as such, eventually they entirely removed the system so that you can no longer switch your gear when inside a dungeon. Not to mention that MiHoYo can technically start designing chambers that are designed with that mechanic in mind. And in my opinion, that would create more problems than it would solve them. Maybe in order to meet people halfway, at least, they could implement a system where you are allowed to change your gear until you start the combat, or until you start combat in the first chamber, for each half, basically, right? So if, for example, you enter floor 12, chamber 1, and you notice Zhao is using the wrong spear, you can still change it, but after you start combat, you can no longer do so, right? That would be a good solution when it comes to that, because the main arguments that people bring up when it comes to this whole topic is that they don't want to leave the Abyss, switch back to their main weapon and then enter it again, right? And if they implement the system in the way that I just described it, it would be it would be a perfect solution, at least in my opinion. Either way, this brings us to my own take on a possible floor 13, because that is something that people are asking for constantly. give us floor 13. The problem that I usually have with that is that this floor would basically be pay to win. In my opinion, right now, floor 12 is tuned in a way where even free-to-play people can get 9 stars if they know how to build their characters as well as their teams, right? If you really know what you're doing, you can get 9 stars. But if they introduce floor 13 with the same system as they have it right now, it becomes next to impossible to get 9 stars. As simple as that. At least I don't think it is possible. But what they could do instead is very simple. You already have amazing boss fights in the game. La Senora, Wayne Shogun, The Whale, all of them outstanding fights, but you kinda don't do anything with them except for farming them for their weekly materials. Not to mention that half the bosses by now go down within seconds. La Senora, for example, might as well have 1 HP point and the fight wouldn't be that much of a difference. So what can you do? Very simple. For floor 13, move away from the 2-chamber system and instead simply put a single boss fight into that floor. And the boss itself can rotate on a, bi-weekly basis. If we take La Senora, for example, put her into floor 13, tune up her HP as well as her damage so that her mechanics actually matter. Of course, we need to keep the 9-star system in mind here, and what I thought would be a really good idea here is to give travelers the option of choosing between 3 different versions of La Senora when they enter floor 13. Version A, slightly increased HP, slightly increased damage, but everything else is the same. If you win, you get 3 stars. Version B, a tightly tuned fight where one mistake doesn't necessarily kill you, but you still have to pay attention to her mechanics. For example, the freeze and the heat mechanic. Right now, you don't really need to pay attention to that, right? But if the damage is scaled to such an extent that you need to reset your bar from time to time, it might be a different story. And if travelers manage to defeat that version, they get 6 stars. And finally, version C, a little bit of my own dream case here. Basically the same version as version B, but the only difference is that after you beat phase 2, Senora goes into an exclusive phase that you only see in the Abyss. What does that look like? Well, there are a lot of options. Maybe she's now using her cryovision and her pyro delusion at the same time, going into overdrive, you could say, I guess. But obviously that is something for the devs to come up with. So yeah, those are my own takes on some of the points that you see being brought up quite often over on Twitter. And before we end this, I want to make one thing very clear here. I myself am still excited for every single reset of the Abyss. I have done every reset of floor 12 for over 2 years now, and I'm still as excited for it as I was back when I started it. But I do understand it when people say that there could be a little bit of a change to it, especially when you take Starville into consideration, because those devs are doing an amazing job when it comes to endgame activities in the game. It's not just Memory of Chaos or Pure Fiction, it's also Golden Gears, the Swarm Disaster, or generally speaking the Simulated Universe. There are a variety of endgame activities, and I think Genshin could, at least use 1 or 2 more endgame activities. Either way, that is enough for me. Let me know what you think when it comes to the points I mentioned. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you maybe even have some points that I didn't talk about at all? If yes, let me know in the comments. And yeah, with that, I will leave you. As always, have a great day or night wherever you live, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.